Welcome back to the show. We are shifting gears a little bit today. We're moving away from some of the headlines and trends we usually cover, and we're stepping right into the life of the church.
Yeah, that's right. And this is I think it's a needed shift. We spent a lot of time on the what of the world, but today we're going to look at the how of the church.
Absolutely. So for everyone listening, I want to set the stage so you know what you're walking into with this deep dive. We're approaching today's discussion through a pretty distinct theological lens. We're grounded in Protestant Christianity and, more specifically, Reformed theology. We're trying to look at things through the framework of, say, the Westminster Confession.
And that's the key distinction. We aren't here looking for pragmatic business hacks or, the latest corporate leadership fad. The question on the table is, what is biblically prescribed?
So we're not asking what works at Google.
No, we're asking, how did Christ order his house? A very different starting point.
The topic today is missions. But maybe not the way you're used to hearing about it. We're not going to be telling a lot of stories about, hacking through jungles or translating the last vowel in some remote village dialect.
Those stories are valuable.
Of course. But today we're talking about the governance behind all that work.
The engine room. The part nobody sees, but without which nothing moves.
That is a perfect image. We're going to be looking at a chapter by Tom Pennington in the book Biblical Missions, Principles, Priorities, and Practices. The chapter is all about the role of church elders in missions.
And the main idea, the thesis he puts forward, is pretty provocative. It definitely pushes against the way things are usually done.
It really does. The thesis is that the local church, and specifically its elders, is the divine command center for world missions.
Command center.
Right, not the missions agency, not the seminary, but the local body of elders who lead a specific congregation.
That term, command center, it's a strong one. It implies authority, and it implies a ton of responsibility. And, if we're being honest, for the better part of the last century, a lot of churches have basically handed that authority over to parachurch organizations.
Well, sure. We see the agencies as the professionals, don't we?
Yeah.
They're the ones with the country-specific knowledge, the maps, logistics network.
And they are. And agencies can be wonderful servants to the church. But Pennington's argument is that when a church just sort of leaves missions on autopilot or it outsources all the strategic thinking to an agency, it's actually an abdication of biblical leadership.
An abdication.
Yeah.
So a failure to do the job they were given.
A failure to rule in the biblical sense of that word.
Okay, let's get into the theology of that. Why does Pennington, and why does this view, insist that the elders are the ones on the hook for this? Why is the local church the primary engine for it all?
You really have to go back to the source, to the promise itself. In Matthew 16, Jesus says, I will build my church. He didn't say, I will build my mission board, or I will build my excellent network of Bible colleges. Those things are, they're man-made tools. They can be very helpful tools, but they are not the institution. The church is the God-ordained institution.
So the Great Commission, then, the command to go and make disciples of all nations, that's a standing order that was given directly to the church.
It is the church's assignment. It's the church's burden to carry. And if the church as an institution is responsible, then it follows that the leaders of the church must shoulder the duty of managing it. You can't delegate your primary responsibility away to a third party.
Let's talk about those leaders for a minute, the elders. The source material, Pennington's chapter, it really drills down into the Greek words used in the New Testament to describe them.
And the words have so much meaning. They're not just, generic titles. In Acts 20, verse 28, Paul is talking to the Ephesian elders. He calls them overseers.
Overseers.
The word in Greek is episkopos. It literally means someone who watches over something, someone who guards, who inspects. It's an active, engaged role.
So it's not a passive, let's just hope for the best kind of role. It's like a sentry on a wall.
Or a superintendent of a building project. You have to know what's going on.
Huh.
And then you have another key word in 1 Timothy 5.17. Paul uses a word that's often translated as rule. Let the elders who rule well be considered worthy of double honor.
Okay, rule is a word that can sound a bit harsh to our modern democratic ears. We tend to prefer words like facilitate or lead.
We do, but the biblical term is stronger than that. It implies real authority. The word is praestemi. It means to stand first, to direct, to manage.
With manage.
Yes. And it's actually the same word Paul uses elsewhere for managing your own household. So if an elder can't manage his own family well, how can he manage the household of God? The parallel is direct. An elder manages the household of God, which includes its global outreach.
Okay, so this is a crucial point. Does managing or ruling mean that the elders have to do everything themselves? I mean, does the elder board need to be the ones booking flights and packing shipping containers and vetting language schools?
Yeah. No, absolutely not. And that's a critical distinction Pennington makes throughout the chapter. Elders are not called to do every single task. They would burn out in a week if they tried.
I can imagine.
They are called to oversee everything. They're the directors of the play, not necessarily the actor in every single scene. They set the vision, they ensure the resources are there, and they hold the work accountable to the standard. But they don't have to be the ones hammering every nail.
That's a helpful picture. The director of the play. So let's apply that directly to missions. What does ruling or overseeing actually look like when the work is happening 5,000 miles away in a different culture?
Well, it has to start with the concept of order. This is a big deal in our whole theological framework. God is fundamentally a God of order. He's not a God of chaos.
And Pennington cites 1 Corinthians 14 on this point.
It does, and it's a great application. Now, the immediate context in 1 Corinthians 14 is the worship service. The church in Corinth had, let's say, some chaotic things happening with tongues and prophecy.
Right. It was a bit of a free-for-all.
Exactly. But in the middle of correcting that, Paul lays down a universal principle. In verse 33, he says, God is not a God of confusion, but of peace. And then in verse 40, he sums it all up. Let all things be done properly and in an orderly manner.
Decently and in order, as the old translation puts it.
Precisely. So now take that principle and apply it to your church's missions budget. If your missions program is a total chaotic mess, if the elders can't honestly say who they support or why they support them or what those missionaries are actually doing on the field, is that program reflecting the nature of a God of order?
Oof. That's a tough question. It sort of reframes the whole issue. It suggests that bad management isn't just an administrative failure. It's actually a theological error. It's a misrepresentation of God.
It's just we're misrepresenting God's character to the congregation and to the world. And according to the source, this kind of orderly managing involves two distinct duties.
Okay, what are they?
First, evaluating the current reality. You have to know the state of the flock as a shepherd would, and that includes the part of the flock that is overseas. You have to know what's going on.
And the second.
Second, planning the future strategy. You can't just react to every request that comes in the door. You have to proactively decide where you are going.
I want to pause on that planning aspect for a second, because sometimes, in spiritual circles, strategic planning gets a bad rap. You'll hear people say things like, we don't need a 5-year plan, we just need to follow the Spirit.
Right, and that sounds very pious, but Pennington argues it's often just a spiritual-sounding excuse for laziness. He points to Luke chapter 14.
Ah, the passage on counting the costs.
Yes. Jesus is teaching about the high cost of discipleship, but look at the analogies he uses to make his point. He talks about a builder who sits down and counts the cost before he starts building a tower.
So he knows if he can finish it.
Right. And he talks about a king who assesses his 10,000 troops before he goes to war against an army of 20,000. He plans. He evaluates.
So Jesus assumes a wise person plans ahead. He's not praising spontaneous, unplanned action.
He's actually implying that starting something without having a reasonable plan to finish it is sheer foolishness. And then you can just look at the book of Proverbs, where there is no guidance, a people falls, but in an abundance of counselors, there is safety. Planning is a deeply spiritual endeavor.
So for an elder then, sitting down with a spreadsheet and a budget to plan out the mission strategy isn't a distraction from real ministry.
No, it is ministry. It's part of ruling well. It's part of being a good steward of God's resources and God's people.
Okay, so let's get practical. If the elders are the command center, and they need to be orderly and proactive, where do they even begin? Most churches aren't starting from a blank slate. They already have a list of missionaries they've supported for years.
That's the typical situation. And you can't just, wipe the slate clean overnight. So you have to start with an audit. Pennington calls this phase 1, evaluating the status quo.
Evaluating what is.
Right. The core principle here is that an elder cannot possibly oversee what he does not know. That seems obvious, but it's so often overlooked.
I'd be willing to bet that in a lot of churches, if you ask the elders to name all the missionaries they support and what they do, many couldn't.
They might know the total budget line item for missions, But they might not know the specific theology, the current ministry focus, or even the family situation of the people they're sending checks to. So the first job is just to gather information. Who are we supporting? What are they doing? Are they theologically aligned with us? Is their work effective?
And this information gathering leads to what the book calls the 3 categories for evaluation. This seems like a really helpful, practical tool for an elder board that might feel completely overwhelmed by this task.
It is. It's a filter. The goal is to sort every single missionary or ministry your church currently supports into one of 3 buckets. It brings clarity to the chaos.
Okay, let's walk through them. What's category 1?
Category 1 is the green light. These are the missionaries and ministries that are biblically and philosophically aligned with your church. They're doing the kind of work you believe is of first importance, say direct evangelism, church planting, or training national pastors.
They're a perfect match.
They're a perfect match. Their doctrine is sound, they're faithful in their work, they communicate well. These are your true partners in the gospel.
So for this category, the action is simple. These are the keepers.
Yes, you keep supporting them fully. In fact, Pennington suggests you should be asking if there's any way you can support them more, either financially or in other ways. These are your frontline troops.
Okay, that's straightforward. Now what about category 2? This is the yellow light.
This is the messy middle, and this is probably where a lot of long-supported missionaries will land. These are often people you've supported for a decade or 2 or 3. There's a deep relationship there. But maybe there are some minor differences that have emerged over time.
What kind of differences are we talking about?
It could be a number of things. Maybe a slight theological variance, nothing that you'd call heretical, but maybe they hold a different view on baptism or spiritual gifts than what your church confesses.
So not a deal breaker, but not a perfect alignment.
Exactly. Or maybe it's a difference in methodology or focus. Perhaps your church, after much study, has decided to focus its resources on unreached people groups. But this missionary you've supported for 20 years is doing a radio ministry in a part of Europe that is, largely considered reached.
So it's still good work. It's just not aligned with your church's current specific strategy.
That's it. So the action for this category is to continue the support. You honor the long-standing relationship. You don't just cut them off because you've developed a new strategy. That would be wrong. But you probably don't increase their support. You just sort of maintain the status quo out of respect for the partnership.
That seems very fair and gracious. Okay, so that brings us to the most difficult one, category 3, the red light.
Right. This category is for missionaries where there are significant differences or serious issues, and there are a few triggers that would land someone here.
What's the biggest one?
Troubling theology is the big one. If a missionary you support starts teaching something that is clearly contrary to Scripture, or if they adopt a view that undermines the gospel, you have a duty to stop funding that teaching.
So that would be a clear red line.
A very clear red line. But there can be practical issues, too. A consistently poor work ethic, a pattern of unresolved conflict with their teammates or national partners. If a missionary is constantly causing division on the field, that's a disqualifying issue.
So for this category, the action is to transition them off the church's support. But Pennington is really clear about the ethics of how this is done. You don't just send a cold email saying you're cut off.
No, not at all. Unless it is a major gospel-denying heresy, you have to be incredibly gracious. The source talks about providing a runway for them.
A run.
Yeah, you give them a generous amount of time to find new funding from other sources, maybe 6 months, maybe a year. You explain the reasons clearly and biblically, but you do it in a way that preserves their dignity. And he adds another scenario. If the missionary is very close to retirement, maybe you just finish it out. Support them for those last 2 or 3 years until they're done.
Strategy with grace. It seems that's the balance you have to strike.
It has to be. You're dealing with people's lives and livelihoods.
Okay, so this evaluation phase is huge. The elders have done their homework. They've sorted everyone. They know who is green, yellow, and red. But just managing that process and then caring for the green light people well, that takes a massive amount of time and energy.
It takes a huge amount of time, way more than most people think. And that reality brings us directly to phase 2, structure and delegation.
This is about making the workload scalable, right?
It is. In a very small church, maybe a church of 50 or 75 people, the board of elders can be the missions committee. They can probably handle the direct oversight themselves.
But once the church starts to grow,
As soon as you grow, the complexity explodes. The number of missionaries, the financial details, the care needs. It just becomes too much for a handful of elders who also have to preach, teach, counsel, and visit the sick. At that point, you need what Pennington calls a missions leadership team, or an MLT.
Now, some people might hear that and think, oh, great, more bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Another committee. Is that what this is?
It's not about bureaucracy, it's about biblical delegation. And we have a perfect model for this in Acts chapter 6.
Ah, the issue with the widows.
Exactly. The Hellenistic or Greek-speaking widows were being neglected in the daily distribution of food. It was a logistics and care failure. And what did the apostles do? They gathered the church and said, it is not right that we should give up preaching the word of God to serve tables.
They didn't say serving tables was unimportant. They said it wasn't their primary calling.
Precisely. They knew they had to stay focused on prayer and the ministry of the word. So what did they do? They delegated the logistics to 7 qualified spiritual men so they could focus on their main task. It's the same principle for elders.
It prevents elder burnout.
It prevents elder burnout, and it ensures that the actual needs of the missionaries, the logistics, the care, the communication, don't get neglected because the elders are too swamped.
So who gets put on this missions leadership team? Pennington has a pretty strong warning against just picking the people who are the most excited about missions.
Yeah, that's a common mistake. You see someone who just got back from a short-term trip and they're all fired up and you think, great, let's put them in charge. But excitement does not equal qualification.
So what are the qualifications?
He goes right back to the model in Acts 6. The apostles said to choose men of good repute, full of the Spirit and of wisdom. So character comes first. You need people who are known for their spiritual maturity.
Beyond character.
You need people with the relevant gifts. The apostles, interestingly, chose Greeks to help the Greek widows. There was an affinity there. For an MLT, you need people with gifts of administration. That's a spiritual gift listed in Romans 12. You need people with discernment, with wisdom.
So you're looking for spiritually mature, wise administrators, not just world travelers.
That's it. And there's one more piece. Congregational affirmation. The apostles told the multitude to pick the 7, and then the apostles appointed them. The church should have a say in affirming these leaders.
Okay, so once you have this team in place, what is the division of labor? What does the MLT do, and what do the elders keep for themselves?
This is a really clear and helpful distinction. The elders steer the ship. The MLT rows the boat.
I like that. What does steering include?
The elders retain final authority on the big picture items. They have the final approval of any new missionary candidate. They are the only ones who can fire or remove a missionary from support. They set the overall missions budget. And most critically, they establish the doctrine and philosophy of missions for the church. They define the mission.
So they set the strategy and the boundaries. What does the MLT do then? What does rowing look like?
The MLT handles the implementation. They do the comprehensive vetting of new candidates and present a recommendation to the elders. They handle all the financial logistics. They take charge of promoting missions within the church. They administer short-term trips. And, maybe most importantly, they are the front line of missionary care.
That care piece seems huge. I can see how elders, as busy as they are, might not have the bandwidth to check in personally with every single missionary on a regular basis.
They just don't. But the MLT can. They can be the ones making the phone calls, sending the care packages, tracking the prayer requests, and making sure that no one on the field feels forgotten or falls through the cracks.
That makes a world of difference. Okay, so we've got the people sorted out with the evaluation. We've got the structure in place with the MLT. Now we need the plan. And this brings us to phase 3, strategic planning.
Right? And this is where the elders, having delegated the day-to-day, can now focus their energy on the big picture. And this is where the source introduces a tool that he calls the missions grid.
The grid sounds very systematic.
Yeah, it is. And it's designed to be. The whole point of the grid is to remove as much emotion and subjectivity from funding decisions as possible. It's a tool to help you make wise, consistent decisions instead of just reacting to whoever gives the most compelling presentation.
So it's about being proactive instead of reactive. It's built on 3 main criteria. Let's start with criterion 1.
Criterion 1 is what he calls New Testament priorities. This is about the what. What type of ministry are we going to prioritize?
And how do you determine that?
Pennington argues that you have to look at the patterns in the New Testament. And based on that, the highest priority always goes to the tip of the spear. Direct evangelism and church planting among unreached peoples. Right alongside that is the training of national pastoral leadership.
So preaching the gospel and establishing healthy churches.
That's priority number 1. And then you have a secondary priority. These are essential support roles. Things like missionary aviation, Bible translation, medical work, mercy ministry, all good and necessary things, but they exist to support the primary work of church planting.
Okay, so that's the first filter. the type of ministry. What's criterion 2?
Criterion 2 is the relationship to the church. This is about the who. How connected is this missionary to our specific local body?
This feels like it could get controversial. How does he break this down?
He proposes 4 tiers of relationship. Tier 1 is the absolute highest priority. The homegrown, home church missionary. This is someone who was raised in your church, came to faith in your church, was discipled and trained, and then sent out by your specific congregation.
Your own sons and daughters in the faith.
Exactly. Tier 2 is the home church missionary. This is someone who joined your church later in life, but they became a member, you affirmed their calling, and you sent them out as their primary sending church.
So they're still yours, just not from childhood.
Right. Then you get to Tier 3. The related home church. This is a missionary sent out by a sister church of like faith and practice, maybe a church in your denomination or network that you trust implicitly.
So you know they're sending church, you trust their process.
Yes. And then there's Tier 4, the lowest priority, the unrelated home church. This is a missionary sent by a church you have no relationship with. They're essentially a stranger who sends you a letter asking for support.
And the source material is pretty blunt about this category, isn't it?
It is. It suggests that elders may wisely choose not to support anyone from this 4th category at all. Not because they're bad people, but because resources are finite and you have a primary responsibility to your own and those you know and trust.
That's a challenging thought. It cuts against the idea of just helping anyone who asks.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have the ministry type, and the who, the relationship. What's the final criterion?
Criterion 3 is the financial support level. And this isn't a separate decision. It's the direct result of the intersection of the first 2 criteria.
So the grid tells you how much to give.
It provides a framework for it, yes. The idea is that someone at the very top of the grid, a Tier 1 homegrown missionary doing priority 1 church planting, should receive the maximum level of support your church offers.
And someone at the bottom.
Someone at the bottom, say a Tier 4 stranger doing a secondary support role, would receive the minimum level of support, or perhaps no monthly support at all, maybe just a one-time gift. It creates a logical, defensible system for stewarding the church's money.
And this system is designed to combat what the source calls the shotgun approach.
Yes, exactly. The shotgun approach is what most churches do by default.
Which is
What? It's supporting, 50 different missionaries, but only giving each of them $50 or $100 a month. You spread your money so thin that you're not actually being a significant partner to anyone.
And what's the consequence of that for the missionary?
The consequence is that it forces them into an endless loop of fundraising. To get fully funded, they have to build a coalition of dozens and dozens of churches, which is exhausting. And then when they come home on furlough, they have to spend their entire time racing around the country to visit all these churches instead of resting and reconnecting with family.
So the alternative proposed here is to support fewer missionaries, but to support them with more significant amounts of money.
Yes. Real substantial partnership. Be a primary supporter for a smaller number of people rather than a token supporter for a large number of people.
Now, what about the other extreme? He also warns against what he calls total support.
Right. That's the idea of one single church providing 100% of a missionary's budget. That sounds generous, but it's actually dangerous for the missionary.
Why is that?
Because it makes them incredibly vulnerable. What if that one church has a budget crisis? What if the pastor leaves and the new pastor has a different vision? The missionary's entire support can be wiped out overnight. A healthy support base involves a few strong, committed church partners.
So it's a balanced approach. Fewer partners than the shotgun method, but more than just one.
That's the wise path.
We're getting close to the end of our time, but I want to make sure we hit on a key caveat that Pennington includes. He says, the grid is a tool, not a cage. What does he mean by that?
He means there has to be room for wisdom and flexibility. The elders can't just blindly follow the formula. They're shepherds, not accountants. There will be times when a unique situation or a strategic opportunity comes along that doesn't fit neatly into the grid.
Can you get an example?
Sure. Maybe a highly trusted missionary partner on the field identifies a critical need for a support ministry. Say a pilot is desperately needed to reach remote villages. Even though that's a secondary priority on the grid, the elders might, in their wisdom, decide to make an exception and support that person significantly because of the strategic need at that specific time.
So the grid provides the baseline, the default, but it doesn't eliminate the need for prayerful discernment from the elders.
Not at all. It informs their discernment. It doesn't replace it.
And what about one-time gifts? Do they have a place in this model?
Yes, a huge place. One-time gifts are a great way to support people or projects that are like-minded and doing good work, but who don't fit into your long-term monthly support grid. It's a way to bless them without derailing your core strategy. You could help with relocation costs, or a vehicle purchase, or a specific project.
That makes a lot of sense. Wow. This has been a really heavy download of information. We've moved all the way from the high-level theology of elder oversight down through the practical steps of evaluation and delegation and into the nitty-gritty of strategic planning with the grid.
It's a comprehensive vision, and it all comes back to that first principle, obedience. This isn't about creating a slick corporate structure. It's about trying to faithfully and wisely manage the resources God has given his church to accomplish the mission he gave to his church.
It's about moving from just paying for missions to actually managing the church's active participation in Christ's work around the world.
That's a great way to put it.
So, as we wrap up, here's the provocative thought from the source material that I'd like to leave you all with. If you were to look at your own church's missions budget right now, tonight, what would it tell you?
Hmm.
Would it reflect a clear, biblical, thought-out strategy? Or would it just look like a historical record of every nice person with a good story that the church has said yes to over the last 30 years?
And maybe to tie it back to the beginning, how does the orderliness of our missions program reflect the nature of the God of order we claim to serve?
That is definitely something to chew on. Thanks for listening to this deep dive on Reformed thinking.